Welcome back to the show, and back into now the third segment of our live show is the topic around Micah Parsons and why was he away for so long. The first part of the offseason was really spent with the Dallas Cowboys being asked all these questions as to why Micah Parsons isn't there. Does it have to do with his contract? Does he want that contract sooner than expected? It seems like we saw Micah Parsons a lot more traveling across to other places like Asia with all the football camps and trying to expand the game of football rather than in the Dallas Cowboys practice, literally, physically being there among his teammates. Once he returned this week to the mandatory part of minicamp and this offseason, he mentioned and made some points about what he was doing, how his offseason was going thus far, and, giving just an explanation as to why he didn't feel the need to show up yet up until this point. He opened up by saying, I think the more years you have, the more you understand that there's also like the business side to it, and I think that's what camp is for. I mean, there was a time where Aaron Donald didn't even go to camp, and he won the Defensive Player of the Year, and then went on to the playoffs as well, and he also stressed that right now, or before this mandatory minicamp part, it was voluntary up until this point. He didn't have to be there if he didn't feel the need to be there. Also, as an undersized rusher, he made the point of saying that he really wanted to let his body heal this offseason and not rush back into it and really exert himself in a time where, again, it is voluntary, so he doesn't have to be there. But where I, sort of stood on the situation, I mentioned it before, and how Mike McCarthy's comments sort of played into this, mentioning to local media how the opportunity of Micah Parsons not being there, learning a new defensive system, was the biggest point of emphasis for me. And also, Mike McCarthy said it was an opportunity missed by Micah Parsons to not be there, even though he prefaced it by saying, that Micah seems pretty engaged, he seems to be in good shape, even if he's not physically there. He was doing some stuff on his own that he felt comfortable with, but again, the opportunity to be there around the teammates and everything like that, I think still is something to point out when you're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, always obviously still in the news, but with a topic like this, you bring in the contract negotiations of not just him, but also CeeDee Lamb playing on his last deal, Dak Prescott on his last contract as well, or his last year of his contract. It all sort of wraps up into this bigger situation than it might necessarily mean if Micah Parsons was already re-signed, if CeeDee Lamb was already re-signed, if Dak had some more years left on his contract. I think this wouldn't be such a pretty big topic in the offseason, but because like it is typically played out with these expiring contracts, it becomes a bigger point of emphasis in the offseason. And also, Micah Parsons went on, and I thought this was pretty interesting, how the idea of not being there, not building that chemistry with some of the young players, with some of his maybe new teammates, and especially Mike Zimmer as well, that seems to be something that a lot of veteran players sort of harp on, to be there when you don't have to. Brandon Cooks, I know, talked about it. Tyler Smith also did a few weeks ago when they were asked about being there when they didn't have to. They brought up the point of building that camaraderie earlier, being those teachers to some of the younger players that might, value their advice more often than a coach's sometimes. And Micah Parsons sort of touched on that issue, that topic a little bit by saying, I think right now it's just more technique. It's a lot of walkthroughs right now, so for my position where I'm at, it's a lot of individual, and I can do a lot of individually workouts by myself or with my trainer. And again, it is a valid, excuse, reason for not being there. You're talking about a linebacker, a lineman, maybe other positions out there as well. You don't really get the necessary feel, physicality from just walking through things. You're not allowed really to have too much physical contact up until this point as of yet, without the pads being on, with all the safety and health rules that are implemented by the NFL. So that's another point where you can sort of get by with that and sort of accept that explanation by Micah Parsons. He certainly earned the time to get his body right for everything that he does for the Dallas Cowboys. That really can't be argued, but at the same time, you go back to this point of Mike Zimmer coming in now, a new system now moving on from Dan Quinn, new players coming in there as well. You get a guy like Trayvon Diggs back, and sort of fitting these pieces all together. I think that Micah could have benefited the other players on his team by being there. And he had a quote that he mentioned on that topic specifically with Mike Zimmer and potentially being there or not, and how that relationship is sort of building up until this point. And he said on that topic, honestly, me and Zim have probably said total of 20 words together. He's a very quiet person. All I keep hearing from coaches is Zim likes it this way, like this. Well, I like it this way, so I can't wait to sit down with him because that would be pretty cool to have that conversation, alluding to the fact that that relationship probably still has to grow a little bit more, as he said. Not too much communication, dialogue, specifically with Mike Zimmer up to this point. And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? A little bit of both, I would say. We're still early enough where it's not a devastating thing to have happened, but again, I would still sit easier if my best player on offense, or on defense, I should say, and just overall on the entire team, would sort of be in a more advanced spot in this offseason, learning the new defense and really trying to relay that to other guys, younger guys that might be trying to figure out other things by getting into the NFL and learning their routines and stuff like that. Micah Parsons, I'm not saying he can't get there, but at the same time, I would sit easier if he would have been there thus far. And now you get into the topic of the money. It always comes down to the business side. Where do the Cowboys stand in those contract talks with Micah Parsons? You have CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott right there as well. You have the most time still with Micah Parsons because he has 2 years left on his rookie deal, including the fifth-year option. So you're not against the clock right now trying to figure out a deal with him. He could probably end up being the most expensive one, potentially along with CeeDee Lamb, but I don't personally think they're going to try and get too close to the Justin Jefferson salary with CeeDee Lamb, in my opinion. I just don't think the Cowboys would relinquish that, knowing that Micah Parsons, his extension is coming up soon after that, with 2 years left on his rookie contract. So I think he would probably be the most expensive one out of him, Dak, and CeeDee. But he still has the most time, and the Cowboys can do a little bit of salary cap juggling and trying to figure out some more room there to grow their salary cap and try to find some way to get Micah Parsons paid accordingly for, again, everything that he has done for their defense. And he expects, honestly, to reset the entire market by being the highest paid non-quarterback when it's his turn to finally get paid. When he was asked about it, he was short and brief about it. He said, he definitely expects to be the highest paid non-quarterback. Didn't really hesitate about it. And on the topic of CeeDee and Dak, he said, I'm patient. Patience is a virtue. I'm waiting my turn. Let CeeDee get whatever. Let Dak get whatever. And also predicted that he could see some of these deals for these high-impact players reaching close to that $40 million per year mark by the time he gets up to try and extend his contract. And I don't think he's too far off, honestly. Based on the money talk of this conversation he had with local media. Maybe not exactly what Dallas wants to hear, already being in salary cap trouble, trying to figure out these other contract negotiations to field a very competitive team. Maybe they don't like hearing that their star player wants to be the highest paid non-quarterback, and also talking about that $40 million mark. Might cause a little bit of panic over there for the Dallas Cowboys front office because they have to keep Micah. Not saying that they have to do whatever he says, but you almost get to that point with Micah and trying to please him to the best of your ability because he is that sort of player, that generational type of player. One of the best defensive pass rushers in the NFL. So trying to do that and work out that situation with him, you try to cater to some of the things he believes and some of the things he wants in this offseason. And, he is there for the mandatory part, so hopefully now he gets up to speed in that Mike Zimmer defense and can contribute as he more likely than not will this offseason, as he usually does. And again, I can mostly agree by staying up to date with what Micah Parsons said on what Mike Zimmer wants to do on defense is huge, because the bigger point in all this, I've harped on it before, is that I don't really think their offense is going to be as advertised this coming year. Compared to previous years, they've been a high-powered, high-scoring team with the uncertainty at the running backs, the wide receiver depth, and the offensive line as well. I don't see that offense really carrying their weight this year, so it just puts more of an emphasis on Micah Parsons to really lead that defense, because I think they're going to have to rely more on that defense to keep them in games rather than, just preserving their lead that they build up in the first 2 to 3 quarters. I think it's going to be more balanced and maybe leaning more towards the defensive side of the ball. So if Micah Parsons can get up to speed, there's really no issue here. Again, the voluntary part of the offseason is the only part he missed. Now getting into the real nitty-gritty part, hopefully he could take those steps to really engage and really start preparing like the regular season isn't that far away. So that's where that stands with Micah Parsons, sort of giving an explanation on where his headspace was at in missing the voluntary parts of it. Not a big deal, really, up to this point. Obviously, the bigger one is CeeDee Lamb, but we'll see if he turns up to the training camp portion, because up until this point, he has not been at mandatory minicamp. So we'll see how that develops, how Micah Parsons also develops in this new defense as the offseason continues. But in the meantime, we'll move on to the next segment and the next break. When we return, more wide receiver rankings, this time in the AFC South, to conclude the receiver groups, and also we'll talk about the Panthers' plans to renovate their stadium and how a lot of change could be coming for the Panthers, improving those facilities after Adam Thielen said they probably have the worst facilities in the NFL. So we'll get into those, more details on both of those topics when we return in a few seconds.